Thank you, David. Welcome, Karen. I'll subject you to the same punishment that I gave David.
Absolutely. What's good for the
goose is good for the gander.
Exactly. Well, thank you for inviting me back. I enjoyed coming last year, and our folks at the AFL-CIO headquarters were pleased to send me one more time to Boston. But I come to you from the city of gridlock. And right now, as you may know, the Republicans in the House are just, they don't know what to do with themselves. Put it closer? Sorry. Eric Cantor losing his seat, if things were kind of like, if we're heading into midterm elections and you don't expect a lot to get done, other than trying to set up votes. And the Republicans, since 2011 have had 54 votes to amend, repeal, defund the Affordable Care Act. And now they're like, well, I don't know. What should we do? The Senate, still obviously in the hands of the Democrats. And some of those moderate Democrats are now, or so-called moderates, I'm not so sure they're moderate. Anyway, so we hear things about possible legislative fixes that they think might be good in part. You've got folks running for election in 2014, and everybody wants to say there's good, as we have recognized since the beginning, there's good stuff in the Affordable Care Act. There's some stuff that costs money. There's some stuff that's bad. And things need to be fixed. So they want to try to fix it. However, we can argue about some of those fixes, whether they make sense. So, for example, the House Republican proposed, and unfortunately too many Democrats voted for it, but the House passed a bill that would change the 30 hours in defining a full-time employee under employer responsibility to raise it to 40 hours. Now, what does that do? It ends up, inviting employers to cut back more because there are more workers who have health care benefits who are working close to 40 hours than there are 30. And I know that intuitively sounds upside down, perhaps, but it costs money from a federal budget perspective. It hurts more workers. But hey, they didn't care. And so what we've seen a lot of action around both in the legislature and from our friends at Treasury and the IRS is the employer responsibility provision, which is a dysfunctional provision. I think we can all agree on that. It is not the employer responsibility provision the labor movement wanted to see, because people may call this a mandate, but it's not. It's a penalty, because it's a conditional penalty, right? You have to be a large enough employer. You have to mess things up, either not offer coverage to enough people, or offer coverage that is not worth anything, or too expensive, and one of your full-time workers has to go into the exchange and qualify for subsidies. So there's lots of hoops to jump through. And it only applies to employers with at least 50 full-time employees. So it's Swiss cheese. It's maybe worse than Swiss cheese. And the things that get talked about legislatively, or the proposals, would make it worse from our perspective, right? Because we begin, with the point of view as stated in the convention resolution last fall. You need you need to recognize that you've created a cliff and things should be prorated. You can't just go, 30 hours is full-time and boom, you have a penalty, you don't have a penalty. Something has to be graduated so that you're picking up more workers, requiring employers to offer coverage to more workers. You got to deal with the problem in the building and construction arena, where small employers, 50 full-time employees, forget it. That exempts virtually everyone. And then, you have to deal with fixing affordability and addressing multi-employer plan issues. There's lots of stuff. But that's not what the moderate Ds, Democrats in the Senate are thinking about. A package of 9 bills was introduced, and what's their solution for the employer responsibility provision? It only applies to employers with 100 employees or more. There's a bill in the House from the Republicans now, because there's been a lot of press, as you folks may have seen, for school employers, education employers, whether we're talking K through 12, community college, universities. What does this Republican want to do? Messer? Exempt. Affordable Care Act mandate doesn't apply to schools. We represent, their teachers and paraprofessionals and bus drivers and cafeteria workers, and they want to be covered. But, okay, a little crazy. But some of what we see in the legislation coming up in Congress has its roots in what the administration has done with the regulations under the employer responsibility provision. Last time that I was here, a little over a year ago, we had proposed rules, and the AFL-CIO and various affiliates and allies in the labor movement had submitted comments, and Treasury had a hearing, and we were complaining and seeking changes on a variety of things, including addressing some of the education stuff. And what happened? July 2nd, you might have even heard me scream all the way here in Boston. First time in my, decades of doing benefits work, benefits policy was announced by blog post. The Assistant Treasury Secretary for Policy announced that there was going to be a delay in the employer reporting requirement, and guess what? Because of that, a delay in the employer responsibility. So instead of being required to comply January 1, 2014, the earliest January 1, 2015. So after my colleagues picked me up off the floor, we said, okay, we don't like it, we're going to yell, we should have been told about it, we've let the administration know how the labor movement feels about that in every possible forum and all the time. But the final rules come out in February of this year, and we got more delay. So it does kind of make it hard for you guys to bargain, because it's kind of a moving target, right? So for very small employers who are already exempt, those under 50, fine. For those who are between 50 and 100 full-time employees, if they meet certain conditions, they've got to pass until 2016. For those who are over 100 full-time employees, there's some special transition rules about how much of the workforce has to be covered. It's enough. It gives me heartburn. I'm sure it gives you more than heartburn. And you combine that with the unknown, as David was talking about, in bargaining, because you're bargaining now for things contracts that will very likely get you over January 1, 2018, and the excise excise tax. And guess what? We have no guidance. The statute has, some stuff that's pretty clear, right? The thresholds are, set in dollar amounts, but there are adjustments that can be made based on the age and gender. There's certain high-risk professions you can make adjustments. And we have no guidance. So we've started work again, as the AFL-CIO together with affiliates and allies. We've started a conversation with the administration about the rules. What's going to happen, what we think ought to be. While our first ground rule, and you can't do this with an agency, but on the Hill, there are some efforts. There may be some bills to repeal the excise tax. In the meantime, we'll work with the agency as best we can to make it work better, and we'll see what happens. But it is a challenge.